Let's go around the table one more time. Just say your name and where you're from so that people can connect your voice to whom you are. We'll go this way this time.
I am Bob Hedlund from Hedlund Plumbing.
Lynn Vandeventer, Coldwell Banker.
George Volman, Volman Ford.
And Scott Farragon from Cartridge World.
And the next voice you hear is going to be my conversation, just a tiny bit of it, with United States Congressman Mike Rogers this morning. We were talking about the big spending bill that the president signed yesterday. Lots of money coming to Michigan, $700 million and so forth. And you'll hear my question for the congressman and his answer, and then I'd love to get your reaction. Well, let's say that you were king for a day or president for a lifetime or whatever you have it. I mean, what would you do to get businesses back in action? I meet with small business people on this program every single day, sometimes in groups in our Mid-Michigan Business Wrap, and they all say the same thing to me, that, you know what, the government isn't really going to be able to do much to convince me to hire people. I'm going to hire people when I need them.
Exactly, and when they have the capital to do it.
Mm-hmm.
What has happened in the last couple of years is they put so much uncertainty into the cost of your business. And at the end of the day, a small business owner has to say, this is what I think my revenue is, and this is what I think I can afford to spend, and I don't have anywhere to go to print money in the basement or borrow it like the federal government. So they're making those decisions on hiring and non-hiring based on what they think their costs are going to be and their growth is going to be. With all of the uncertainty, cap and trade, the largest energy tax in the history of the country, still laying on the table, with the health care bill that they think will cost hundreds of billions of dollars to companies all across the country laying on the table. They're not sure what their true costs are going to be. With all of the new regulation, with all of those new costs hanging out there, they're thinking, I can't hire someone. With the government borrowing so much money that it competes with local businesses being able to borrow capital to invest in themselves, has created a longer recession. And matter of fact, if you notice with job employments, Michael, this thing is only getting worse. So what I would do is take away all that uncertainty. I would say, listen, we don't want to be the highest corporate income tax in the world. Actually, we're second highest next to Japan, except they're talking about lowering it, which would make us the highest corporate income tax in the world. We need to be more competitive. So let's get out of their way. The best program we can do is let a small business be a small business, let them employ people, let them make money, and at the end of the day, that's good for teachers, it's good for students, it's good for the healthy economy, and it's an easy thing to do, and it won't make us go to China to borrow the money.
What do you think?
I think he's dead on. The best way to streamline is get out of the way. What my major concern, it goes back to the original stimulus. All you're doing is propping up. You're doing a temporary prop up. Let the market, let the chips fall where they'll fall, and we'll get through this and rebuild with strength instead of rebuilding with our tax dollars.
Right, and the rebuilding is going to be done by small businesses. It's not going to be done by the government.
Absolutely.
The government produces nothing.
Yep.
And I'm always reminded, anytime someone in Washington talks about stimulus money and those type of things, that look at what we're doing for you. Are you kidding me? This is my money. It's your money. It's everybody's money. I don't think so. I mean, so I think there's a fundamental disconnect with the principles, the economic principles that work, and ones that are so-called principles that don't work. And right now, what they're doing is not working. So what they are doing is a violation of principle. And you know what? You can't have two of the same principles that are diametrically opposed working in a marketplace. Either one works and the other one doesn't, and vice versa. And what they're doing right now does not work.
Well, a lot of people feel that the government should just get out of the way and do something real drastic that sounds drastic, but get rid of the payroll tax. What do you think, George?
That was one of the solutions that several of the conservative people came up with and said, look, if we get rid of this, that will take some of the uncertainty out of, at least in the short term. And not only that, but in that example, I think it was basically 1/4 of the total original stimulus package would be spent on that if they got rid of it for 1 year. As I've said often on this program, my biggest problem is I feel like I go to work just to make revenue to pay their taxes, not to be able to make my business prosper. And that is the big issue. And nobody in small businesses I talk to are sitting back saying, I love what the government is doing.
Scott, is it uncertainty that keeps you from hiring or expanding? Or are you in a position to even consider that?
Well, we're not expanding right now, and it is uncertain. I mean, you look at the sales, you look at where everything's going, you try and make your best guess for what the expenses are going to be. And could you use more people? You definitely can use more people because you're trying to do as much as you can. Sometimes you have to do a lot more yourself. I found myself back in the store a little bit more lately as we're going through the summer. Summer's typically a little bit slower. I think with people on vacation, they're not at business, they're not at home and printing as often. But yeah, it is uncertainty.
I would say it's not so much even at a federal level. This comes down into a local area, and I'll give you an example. This week, being a plumbing contractor, any job that we do, we have to pull plumbing permits. And there is a local jurisdiction in the area, Lansing area, and I'm not going to get into who because it doesn't matter because it's all about the same. But they effective Monday, the permits used to be through the state of Michigan. Effective Monday, with zero notice, they took over the inspections and the permits. I have a job that I need to pull a permit on. My permit cost through the state, that permit was $255. By them taking it over locally on restructuring that same permit went to $540.
Double.
More than double. It's up 108% is what it went up. So now I'm scrambling with other jobs. I have to go back and line item, tell the people, you know what, this is totally out of our control. But it's at the local level, it's at the state level, federal. I mean, and they're in their own world.
Well, and I'll give you another example along the same lines. Almost every water municipality district is experiencing a decrease in demand, okay, for the product of water. And that's because people are conserving. They're not watering their lawns and so on and so forth.
They're buying those 1.6 toilet
right, and they're buying those toilets from Bob. Okay,
That's what they're supposed to do, right?
That's right.
But anytime you have a demand curve that bends downward and the demand drops, the price then falls accordingly because you don't have the demand and you have to get the demand up. So you have to do it with a price incentive. Not in government. Every single one of these municipalities is raising their water rates. Well, we got to balance our budgets, blah, 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 blah. Did they ever think maybe we ought to cut back on something? And that's what we have to do.
Exactly.
I mean, we don't have the ability to say, Michael, you're just going to have to pay more for the service. That's just the way it is. It just doesn't work that way. And this is what I'm talking about when I say they violate the economic principles, okay? And they do it consistently, and this is the reason why we're stuck.
Let me ask you, because this sort of dovetails into it, and it's a story that was on the wire this morning. A drop in productivity could signal that companies soon will begin hiring again, according to economists. Worker productivity fell for the first time this year, meaning that companies that want to grow may have to, in fact, hire new workers to do it. I guess that's easy to see on a big scale, like an automotive company that cut way back, and now if they're going to get back up to speed, has to inch their way back up. These are stats that came from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics.
Well, the challenge with that is that, productivity is defined, I believe, as output per man hour. Okay, so if that's dropping, let's say that drops in my place, I'll replace somebody, okay, but I won't hire somebody else. In other words, if you're not productive, you're out.
You're going to look for the problem.
We track productivity down to units produced per hour, total throughput through the store per hour.
Right.
Exactly, and we
And
have
if
it
you
set
have
up
somebody-
as a team environment, and so it affects the entire store's output, and it's fairly obvious who's not producing, and then we replace them with someone who
There you
will
go.
produce.
Well, how do you track that at Cartridge World?
Yeah, that's interesting.
We we take a physical inventory every single day.
Meaning how many?
How many
Cartridges there
we
are.
have in stock. Yep. We go through, we look at how many we sold, and then it got a little more complicated with two stores because I have to figure out how many we've transferred between the stores. And then you take the difference between what you started with, what you ended with, what you produced throughout the day, and divide that by the hours worked that day to come up with a total. Well, first you end up with the throughput number, and then you end up with cartridges produced per hour worked. And then we track everything on a daily basis, and there are monthly incentives for production goals to hit for 3 or 4 different levels for monetary bonuses.
Isn't that totally dependent on how many people walk in the door, though?
Their throughput's not dependent at all on how many people walk through the door. It's how much is produced in the back, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Because if nobody walked through the door and all they did was produce, then the inventory at the end of the day would be a lot larger. Divide that by the amount of hours that they worked
okay.
in. Does that make sense?
So you need to produce cartridges even if they're not going out the door immediately.
Correct.
You're building up your
It's
inventory.
not on demand all the time. No, it's production based. It's batch based, where we've
I
got a
see.
certain type of cartridge, and we'll do, 100 of those, even if that particular day you might only sell 20.
Because you know you're going to need them eventually.
Exactly, and you can't do everything all the time.
So you're almost predicting what's going to be walking in the door for that next order for future.
Because
Yeah,
That's
well,
gotta be the
yes,
real
and-
challenge.
exactly. And we have inventory levels, and so they can look at the inventory levels and say, oh, we're getting low on this particular color type of cartridge, so we need to start producing those.
Is it that way in the car business,
Yeah,
too?
well, everybody, and Lynn and I are probably more closer aligned on this. We track our salespersons what we call current average, which is a 90-day rolling average. And we track it on graphs. And if a salesperson starts dropping and we can't make the remedial corrections with that individual, yes, they are let go. But I'm not going to hire 2 salespeople just because that guy dropped or that gal dropped. I'm going to, just like with you, you
Exactly.
get rid of the one that's not producing. And that's the fallacy of what we're talking about here, is because that doesn't take into effect that we're looking at the quality of what's being produced and taking the weak link out of our process, which is what you do.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, it doesn't help somebody who's not selling cars to work there anyway because they're not making any money, right?
That's correct.
Right.
35 minutes after the hour, our phone lines are open at 888-900-9966. Is it uncertainty that's stopping your business from expanding? Or any other questions or comments for our expert panel here? We have George Volman, Bob Hedlund, Lynn Vandeventer, and Scott Farragon. I'm Michael Patrick Shields. We're back in a flash with the Mid-Michigan Business Wrap.